Imagine for a second surviving a literal roadside bomb in Afghanistan. Operating in one of the most, well, the most high-stakes, adrenaline-fueled environments on Earth.
Right, total survival mode.
Exactly. But then you realize years later that the ultimate test of your psychological resilience isn't actually in a war zone. It's standing in your own kitchen.
Oh, yeah. Deeply sleep deprived.
Deeply sleep deprived,
Huh?
covered in exploding pancake batter, just watching your toddler cheerfully stomp through like raw eggs on the floor.
The contrast there is completely jarring, but it points to this really fascinating psychological reality.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, the mechanisms that we use to survive extreme existential threats, they're surprisingly identical to the mechanisms you need to survive the mundane, grinding chaos of everyday life.
And that is the exact territory we are mapping out today. So welcome to a brand new deep dive. We have a stack of incredibly unique source material in front of us today, guys.
We really do. We're working from a translated transcript of a Dutch YouTube interview. It's from the Wisdom podcast.
Yeah, and the guest is this former Marine and Special Forces mountain leader.
Yeah.
And he basically took all of that extreme military conditioning and he completely redirected it.
Right. He transformed himself into a highly successful international real estate entrepreneur.
Which is a wild pivot.
Oh.
But to be clear up front for you listening, the objective of our analysis today isn't to just walk you through a step-by-step real estate seminar.
No, not at all. Nor is it to glorify military tactics. What we are attempting to decode here is a highly specific framework for operating in the modern world.
Yeah, it's about understanding how to navigate heavily regulated environments, how to potentially engineer an escape from the traditional economic cycle.
And maybe most importantly, how to apply absolute emotional control when your environment is just spiraling completely out of your hands.
Totally. So whether you are currently trying to build a financial fortress for your family, or you simply want to know how to, not lose your mind when your morning routine completely collapses, this deep dive is for you. And to understand this mindset, we really first have to look at the environment our source is reacting to.
Yeah, you have to understand the pressure he's feeling. He spends a significant portion of the interview outlining this concept he calls financial slavery versus financial freedom.
And he paints a pretty intense picture of the current macroeconomic landscape, I gotta say.
He does. He is operating from a perspective of high friction. He reacts very strongly to that economic concept you often hear summarized as, the phrase, you will own nothing and be happy.
Right. The World Economic Forum thing.
Exactly. And while some economic forums present that as this shift toward a utopian, frictionless sharing economy where you just rent what you need and shed the burden of ownership, our source views it through a much more defensive lens.
Yeah, as an independent investor, he interprets this trend as a coordinated push toward basically total governmental control.
Right. A system designed to slowly strip the individual middle-class citizen of their hard assets.
And he brings up several specific mechanisms to support this view. He points to the development of central bank digital currencies, the conceptual rise of, smart cities.
And most tangibly for him, shifting tax structures. Because he operates heavily in the Netherlands, he brings up the specific transition from Box 3 to Box 2 taxation.
Okay, let's actually unpack this, because for anyone listening who isn't familiar with the Dutch tax code, which I assume is most of us, it basically comes down to a government changing the rules of the game while the ball is already in the air right on.
That's a great way to put it. Let's break down the mechanics of that shift because it perfectly illustrates why investors feel so squeezed right now.
Yeah, go for it.
So in the Netherlands, Box 3 taxation has historically functioned as a wealth tax based on an assumed fictitious yield.
Wait, assumed?
Yeah. So if you held a certain amount of assets, the government simply assumed you were making, say, a 4 or 5% return on those assets, and they taxed you on that assumption.
Regardless of whether your actual return was higher or if you actually lost money that year.
Exactly. Regardless of reality.
Wow. Which is already a tough pill to swallow if you have a bad year in the market. You're paying taxes on money you didn't even make.
Right. But the shift toward Box 2 and the broader restructuring of how rental income and wealth are treated there means the government is now trying to capture more of the actual realized gains from substantial holdings. They are, tightening the net.
Got it. And the guest perceives these continuous adjustments, like higher transfer taxes, stricter rent controls, shifting wealth brackets, not just a standard economic policy.
No, he sees it as the construction of what he literally calls a financial fence.
The financial fence.
Right.
That phrase really stuck with me because it isn't just about paying taxes on the money you make.
Right.
It's about the penalties applied when you try to take your chips off the table entirely.
Yes, and he uses Belgium as a prime example of this, specifically pointing to exit taxes.
An exit tax is, like, perhaps the most literal interpretation of a financial fence.
It really is. Basically, if you have built up significant wealth within a country, so you built a company or accumulated massive stock portfolio, and you decide you want to move your primary residence and your assets to a different country.
The original country levies a massive tax on the unrealized capital gains of your assets, simply for the act of leaving.
Exactly, just for crossing the border.
He tells this story that clarifies just how rigid this fence can be. He knows a woman whose husband is heavily invested in Tesla stock.
Right, the Tesla story.
Yeah. So on paper, they are incredibly wealthy. They have this massive net worth. But because of their jurisdiction and the specific exit taxes and capital extraction penalties in place, they are effectively trapped.
Trapped by their own wealth, essentially.
Right. They consulted high-level tax specialists and fiscal experts to figure out how to liquidate and move that wealth, and the conclusion was that they just couldn't do it without taking a catastrophic financial hit.
See, that scenario draws a really stark line between paper wealth and liquid freedom. You can have millions on a ledger, but if the regulatory environment prevents you from converting that ledger into mobility, your wealth is totally theoretical.
Right.
But, from an impartial macroeconomic standpoint, we do have to recognize why governments build these fences.
Because they need money.
Basically, yeah. A modern state requires immense capital to function. Infrastructure, healthcare, defense, social safety nets, all of these rely on a stable tax base.
Of course.
If the most successful, highly mobile individuals can simply extract their capital tax-free the exact moment domestic policies change or taxes rise, the state's economic foundation just crumbles.
So capital controls and exit taxes are a state's defense mechanism against wealth flight.
Exactly. It's self-preservation.
It makes complete sense from the perspective of a government trying to keep the lights on. But when you look at it from the individual's perspective, I mean, it feels a bit like a lobster trap.
Oh, I like that. A lobster trap.
Yeah, because think about it. A lobster trap is a brilliant piece of engineering because it is completely frictionless on the way in.
Right. It smells great. There's bait.
Exactly. The funnel guides you right to the center. It's totally effortless to enter the system. But the moment you try to turn around and swim out, the sharp internal prongs catch you.
That is a perfect analogy.
The modern financial system, particularly for the upper middle class, operates on similar mechanics. I mean, it is incredibly easy to put your money in. You've got automatic payroll deductions into retirement accounts, seamless stock trading apps on your phone, easy mortgages.
But the extraction phase, especially if you want to extract that wealth across borders, triggers the trap.
Right. The prongs catch you.
That mechanical comparison highlights the core tension here perfectly. It is the friction between the collective necessity of the state and the individual desire for sovereign autonomy. And it raises a really profound question about the future of class mobility. I mean, the ultra-wealthy billionaires with family offices, they will likely always find ways to navigate or completely bypass these fences through complex offshore structuring.
For sure, they have teams of lawyers.
Exactly. But for the middle class, or the moderately successful individual investor, the fence is very, very real. If your capital is locked into one geographic location by punitive extraction laws, your physical human mobility is fundamentally decreased.
You literally become financially tethered to the soil you were born on.
Right. Completely exposed to however the political or economic climate shifts in that specific jurisdiction.
Which is an incredibly claustrophobic thought if you prioritize personal freedom. And I do find myself wanting to push back on his framing a little bit here.
Go for it.
Is it truly a trap, or is this just the inherent unavoidable cost of participating in a secure modern society? I mean, our guest spent his early career in the military, which is an institution entirely funded by the tax base.
Right.
We all benefit from the roads, the defense, the baseline social order. You can't maintain a stable society if everyone treats their citizenship like a hotel. They can just check out of the second the bill gets a little too high.
That is a completely fair point. And honestly, the guest actually acknowledges that exact paradox in the source material.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he explicitly states, quote, "I come from defense, and defense is paid for by taxes, so taxes are inherently good." So he isn't operating from this anarchic standpoint of wanting zero taxes.
Okay, so what is his specific issue then?
His frustration stems from what he perceives as a unilateral alteration of the social contract. He feels he took disproportionate personal risks working nights, taking on leverage, sacrificing time with his family to build a real estate portfolio from a very average starting position.
Right, he earned it.
And now that he has crossed the finish line and achieved success, he feels the state is retroactively changing the rules to penalize that success, often redirecting those funds toward global initiatives he doesn't personally support.
Ah, I see. It's the sensation of playing a grueling game, finally scoring the winning goal, and then watching the referee just rewrite the rule book while you're celebrating.
Exactly. And regardless of where anyone falls on the political spectrum regarding wealth taxation, the objective reality is that the regulatory environment is becoming more complex, not less.
Which forces a really critical pivot in his overarching philosophy. Because if we concede that the macro world, the global economy, the shifting tax codes, the geopolitical landscape is largely outside of our individual control.
And becoming increasingly restrictive.
Right. Then we are left with a fundamental question. What is the one domain over which you actually maintain absolute, unyielding sovereignty?
The space inside your own head. The way you internally process and externally react to the chaos around you.
Bingo. And to understand how he developed his specific framework for mental sovereignty, we have to examine the environment that forged it.
Let's trace this back to the beginning, because his origin story is surprisingly relatable.
Yeah, he don't grow up as this hyper-focused prodigy destined for elite military service. At 17, he was pretty aimless.
He describes himself as totally lacking direction. And his mother, presumably out of frustration with him, just hands him a TV guide, points to a picture of a Marine storming a beach, and basically tells him he needs discipline and should go do that.
It is a beautifully mundane catalyst for what would become this extreme trajectory. So he travels to Amsterdam for the initial psychological and physical screening for the Marines.
And the numbers here are crazy. He notes that out of the 53 candidates in his specific group, only 3 passed.
3 out of 53.
Yeah, that metric alone establishes a baseline. The screening process isn't just looking for physical strength. It is aggressively filtering for a very specific type of psychological resilience and malleability.
And once he's in, he doesn't just settle. After serving in the infantry, completing deployments to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and literally surviving actual IED explosions,
he decides to push for the absolute ceiling of military training. In 2010, he volunteers for the Mountain Leader training with the British Commandos.
And this isn't some quick, intense boot camp. This is a 9-month endurance event.
To comprehend the psychological toll of a 9-month course in that specific environment, you really have to strip away the Hollywood glamorization of military training.
Yeah, it's not like the movies.
Not at all. He is operating in the UK and mountainous terrains. He describes an existence of being perpetually cold, permanently wet, and profoundly sleep-deprived for essentially the entire duration of a human pregnancy.
9 months of that. Just the misery is unfathomable.
To contextualize the difficulty, out of the entire history of the Dutch Marines attempting this specific joint course, he was only the 109th person to successfully complete it.
Wow. And he makes a really vital distinction during this part of the interview between regular infantry and special forces.
It's a distinction that heavily informs his later business philosophy, actually.
Yeah, it's not just a matter of special forces guys being able to run faster or shoot better. It is a fundamental difference in mission architecture and the required operating psychology.
Exactly. He is careful to emphasize that one role is not inherently superior to the other. They simply serve entirely different functions on the chessboard.
Right.
The infantry is designed to hold the line. It operates on the mechanics of mass. It requires large numbers, highly visible presence, and tightly coordinated linear frontal action.
Whereas special
forces, by contrast, operate in tiny, isolated clusters. Their mandate requires a significantly higher threshold for personal risk and an ability to execute highly specialized, asymmetric, and often completely invisible tasks.
He gives this hypothetical example of needing to neutralize an enemy command post located deep behind the front lines. You cannot parachute 1,000 infantrymen into that scenario.
No, the logistical noise would be deafening, and they would be detected instantly.
Right, so you send a 4-man team. That team has to operate with a completely different mindset. They don't have the luxury of overwhelming force or immediate backup.
And it is during this grueling, freezing 9-month Mountain Leader course that he really crystallizes the core philosophy that allows a 4-man team to survive.
And that philosophy boils down to a conscious, forced choice between a constructive attitude and a destructive attitude.
Yes. When you are freezing in the mud, exhausted to the point of hallucination, and feeling a deep sense of unfairness, he argues that the human brain experiences a mental flinch.
A mental flinch.
Yeah, it is an involuntary initial spark of profound negative emotion.
And this brings us back to the kitchen and the exploding blender. Because this anecdote is the perfect civilian translation of that special force's mental flinch.
It really is.
So, picture the scenario for a second. He and his wife have young children. They've just endured a terrible sleepless night, the kind of deep, bone-aching exhaustion that every parent listening intimately understands.
Oh, absolutely. The worst.
It's the morning. His wife is trying to make a simple breakfast of oatmeal pancakes. She throws oatmeal, eggs, and milk into the blender. But earlier that morning, he had hastily emptied the dishwasher and just haphazardly screwed the blender's base together without checking the seal.
A classic breakdown in domestic logistics and communication, amplified by severe fatigue.
Exactly. So she hits the power button. Because the base isn't secure, the centrifugal force just blows the bottom out. A literal geyser of wet, sticky oatmeal and raw egg detonates across the kitchen counters, the cabinets, the floor.
Nightmare.
And, as if perfectly choreographed by the universe, their toddler wanders into the kitchen and immediately begins stomping through the raw pancake batter on the floor.
It is a moment of concentrated, pure chaos. And if we freeze that exact microsecond and apply his military training, we can break down the psychology of the response.
Let's do it.
During his time in the mud with the British commandos, he learned a brutal lesson about vocalizing misery. If you start complaining, if you articulate how cold and miserable you are, you trigger what he terms the law of attraction for misery.
It just breeds more misery.
Exactly. The negativity becomes a contagion. You pull the morale of your team down, you degrade your own cognitive function, and ultimately, you fail the mission.
So, standing in a kitchen, coated in oatmeal, with a toddler tracking eggs across the floor, he experiences that exact same mental flinch. He has a choice to make.
And this is where his framework is so crucial. He explicitly notes that the internal feeling of anger, the visceral sensation that this is a terrible morning and I am furious, is completely valid.
So he's not saying you shouldn't be mad.
No, acknowledging that the situation is miserable is step one. He is not advocating for emotional blindness.
Right.
The brilliance of his approach lies entirely in the mechanical separation of the internal feeling from the external action he executes next.
He consciously, deliberately chooses a constructive, positive operational behavior. Instead of yelling, instead of blaming his wife for turning it on or blaming himself for assembling it poorly, he chooses to laugh.
He laughs, he gets a mop, he cleans up the batter.
I think this is like the most vital takeaway of the entire deep dive, because so much of our modern anxiety, that low-level continuous hum of stress we all carry around, is generated by our complete inability to make that separation.
For sure.
We operate under the false assumption that because we feel an intense emotion like anger or panic, we are obligated to act angrily or frantically. We allow the initial emotional start to completely dictate the physical execution.
We weld the emotion and the response together into a single, unbreakable reflex.
Exactly.
The Special Forces conditioning essentially inserts a microsecond of space between the stimulus, the blender exploding, and the response.
And within that tiny fraction of a second, you possess the autonomy to observe the emotion objectively. You can say to yourself, I feel absolute fury right now. But acting out that fury will not clean the floor. It will unnecessarily escalate the tension with my wife, and it will terrify my toddler.
Therefore, my optimal move is to act calmly.
It is wild to consider that surviving the psychological toll of sweeping for IEDs in an Afghan sandbox and surviving a toddler stomping in raw eggs rely on the exact same emotional regulation tool.
It's the exact same muscle.
But I do have to ask the skeptical question here, because I know people are thinking it. Doesn't this border dangerously close to toxic positivity?
I was wondering when we'd get to that.
Right, because if you are literally freezing in the mud for 9 months, or you're covered in sticky oatmeal after 3 hours of sleep, aren't you simply allowed to be angry? If you constantly suppress the outward expression of your valid emotions, don't you eventually turn into an unfeeling robot?
That is definitely the most common critique of stoic or military mindsets. But if we analyze his specific wording, he is actively warning against toxic positivity.
Oh, he is.
Yes, because toxic positivity requires a denial of reality. It is standing in the freezing mud and trying to convince yourself that you are actually warm. or looking at a ruined kitchen and saying, "This is wonderful."
Right, which is just delusional.
Exactly. He is advocating for the exact opposite. He says, quote, "The feeling you have is justified. That is allowed. That is how it is." He demands total acceptance of the miserable reality.
But he draws a hard line at letting that misery hijack your subsequent behavior.
Yes. It is the difference between experiencing an emotion as data and being controlled by that emotion as a master.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. You feel the anger, you acknowledge it, you say, "Hello, anger, I see you," and then you politely ask it to step aside while you grab the paper towels because the floor needs mopping.
That's a great way to visualize it.
And what becomes truly fascinating is how this micro skill of emotional detachment scales up. Because the ability to separate your initial programmed reaction from the objective reality of a situation doesn't just save your morning routine.
No, it scales massively.
It is the exact same cognitive tool he uses to see through massive global illusions. Which brings us to his deployment in Mali and the profound dissonance between the stories we are told and the reality on the ground.
The 2015 United Nations mission in Mali serves as like a masterclass in narrative collapse.
Let's set the parameters of this deployment for everyone. He is sent into Mali as part of a UN mission. His Special Forces team, consisting of about 42 operators plus their support staff, is pushed deep into the Sahara Desert.
Deep into the desert.
Yeah, and their explicit mandate is to act as the eyes and ears of the overarching UN force. They are tasked with mapping the physical and political territory, and the narrative briefing they received before going in was incredibly binary.
Very black and white. The top-down institutional narrative provided to them was essentially this. The official Malian government forces are the legitimate, recognized authorities. They are the good guys whom the UN is there to support and stabilize.
And the bad guys.
Conversely, the indigenous Tuareg people, who are nomadic tribes inhabiting the Saharan region, are classified as the insurgents. They are framed as the bad guys, the hostile forces responsible for laying roadside bombs and destabilizing the region.
So his team loads up their specialized vehicles, and they drive. They push 3 days deep into the absolute middle of nowhere. We're talking about the deep Sahara. No roads, no infrastructure, total isolation.
And the reality they uncover on the ground completely shatters the neat PowerPoint briefing they received back at headquarters.
The revelation is immediate and stark. He discovers through ground-level observation that the supposedly legitimate government forces they were sent to support were deeply entrenched in systemic corruption.
Right. They were actively facilitating human smuggling routes and drug trafficking operations.
Oh, and the Tuareg.
Meanwhile, the Tuareg insurgents were not simply chaotic terrorists operating out of malice. They were complex human beings fighting to maintain control over their ancestral lands.
They were actively rejecting artificial national borders that had been drawn across their historical territory decades prior by European colonial powers.
Exactly. The Tuareg perspective is essentially, our people have moved across this desert for centuries. Decades ago, men in suits sitting in a room in Paris or London drew an arbitrary line through the sand, and now a global coalition is telling us we are criminals for crossing our own backyard.
That completely flips the script. And our guest, this highly trained elite Western soldier sent to monitor the enemy, ends up sitting in the dirt drinking tea for 8 hours with these very Tuareg fighters.
8 hours of drinking tea with the quote-unquote enemy. And it is during those 8 hours that the entire illusion of the provided geopolitical narrative just dissolves.
He applies that same cognitive detachment he learned in the mud.
Yes. He stops reacting to the label of insurgent and looks at the objective reality in front of him. He realizes he is just a human sitting across from other humans who are fiercely defending their families, their culture, and their way of life against external imposition.
Whenever I hear stories like this, I can't help but compare global conflicts, and frankly, even the frenzy of financial markets, to a massive stage play.
A stage play? How so?
Well, as the public audience, we get incredibly invested in arguing about the actors on the stage. We fiercely debate who is the hero, who is the villain, who delivered their lines poorly.
Right, we focus on the drama.
But from his perspective in the desert, he realized that fighting the actors is a total distraction. The real power and the real truth of the situation is held by the people who built the stage, wrote the script, and drew the borders in the first place.
That analogy perfectly captures his realization. If you allow yourself to be consumed by the drama on the stage, you completely miss the underlying mechanics of the theater.
Yeah.
And he takes this concept of detachment even further with another remarkable encounter in that same desert.
Oh, right, the family.
Yes. His team is driving, again, days away from any recognizable civilization or infrastructure. The landscape is totally desolate, and they stumble across a single family living in the middle of this barren expanse.
It's a highly pregnant woman, her husband, and a few children just playing with a ball in the sand.
And the soldiers are completely baffled. Their immediate Western instinct is that this is an emergency. They tell their translator to ask the family, "What are you doing out here? Are you lost? Do you need water? We have a medical team. We can check on the pregnant woman."
And the father of the family is completely unfazed.
Totally unfazed. He essentially replies, "We are perfectly fine. We have our goats. We have our food supply. We have water. Why would we need anything else?"
This family existed in a state of complete, blissful unawareness of the global system.
Yeah.
They had no conception of the United Nations. They didn't know about the shifting tax brackets in Europe. They didn't care about the arbitrary borders, and they were completely disconnected from the internet.
They existed entirely within their immediate tactile reality, and a guest noted that they radiated an intense, undeniable happiness.
We throw around the phrase ignorance is bliss constantly, but seeing it manifest in such a raw, literal way is profound.
It really makes you think.
And it highlights the exact opposite problem we face in the modern West. We live in an era of total information saturation. Because of our phones, we have continuous exposure to everything happening everywhere.
Right, you can't escape it.
We know what a billionaire's make-a-yacht looks like docked in Monaco, and we know exactly what a 19-year-old crypto influencer is eating for breakfast in a penthouse in Dubai. And that relentless, unavoidable exposure to the highlight reels of the entire planet breeds this unending, gnawing baseline of dissatisfaction in our own lives.
This observation forces a very difficult question about the nature of our consumption-driven economy. If total detachment from the global narrative, like that family in the Sahara, is the key to genuine peace, but we are inextricably bound to a Western system where simple survival requires continuous capital generation.
How do we bridge that gap?
Exactly. How do you find balance?
That is the ultimate puzzle. Can we cultivate a lifestyle of selective ignorance? Can we train ourselves to care deeply and exclusively about our immediate family, our local community, and our personal financial stability, while intentionally tuning out the macroeconomic and political noise that only serves to spike our cortisol levels?
It seems necessary for mental survival, honestly. But to achieve that state of selective ignorance in a Western society, you need a mechanism.
Right.
As the guest pragmatically points out, we cannot all just abandon our lives and move into a goat hair tent in the Sahara. We live in a society with built-in overhead, healthcare, housing, food, education. These things require money.
You cannot ignore the system until you have built a buffer against it.
Exactly.
So I want you, the listener, to pause and consider a direct question right now. What arbitrary lines have been drawn in your own life by your employer, your industry, or societal expectations that you are blindly accepting as unchangeable reality?
Are you exhausting yourself fighting the actors on the stage, or are you starting to look at the script?
Because our guest reached the point where he decided to stop reciting the lines he was given. He needed a tactical escape plan. And his financial awakening didn't happen in a sterile boardroom. It happened while he was covered in dust in a war zone.
Let's shift now from the philosophical mindset to the actual tactical execution.
Yes, how did he actually do this?
The year is 2008. He is deployed in Afghanistan. The environment is intensely dangerous. His day-to-day reality involves physically sweeping routes for improvised explosive devices. He is deployed in this high-stress environment for 5 months.
Okay.
But before he left the Netherlands, he had made a seemingly small administrative decision. He had put his personal home on Airbnb. When he returns from the deployment and checks his bank account, he realizes he has generated 14,000 euros in purely passive rental income while he was away.
That moment provides an incredible contrast, and it triggers his entire awakening. I mean, he is out in the sand, literally risking his physical life and trading his time for a fixed government salary.
Right.
Meanwhile, a physical asset back home, an inanimate pile of bricks and mortar, generated a massive amount of capital without requiring any of his physical presence or risk. The light bulb flips on, the script changes.
He recognizes the profound inefficiency of trading his time for money. He begins obsessively studying real estate. He starts buying and renting properties. His strategy becomes cyclical.
Meaning what?
Every time he deploys, he rents his primary residence, uses the income to pay down leverage, and scales up his portfolio.
Smart.
We fast forward a decade to 2018. He and his wife have successfully acquired 6 rental properties. They sit down and look at the math, and they realize that the passive income generated by these 6 properties has fully eclipsed their combined salaries.
His salary as an elite special forces team leader and her salary working at a local gym.
Replaced completely.
And the final catalyst that pushes them over the edge is a personal development seminar. Which is funny, because he admits in the interview that as a hardened Marine, he was highly skeptical of the whole self-help seminar environment.
Yeah, he wasn't really the target demographic for that.
But while sitting there, a speaker uses a very simple cutting phrase. Life has a deadline.
Life has a deadline. That phrase completely recontextualized his trajectory. He realized he was on a path. He had signed contracts that would keep him operating in the military until his late 50s.
Spending months away from his young children.
Exactly. He realized he already possessed enough passive income to survive comfortably, so the logical question became, why am I still trading my precious, rapidly depleting supply of time for a paycheck I no longer strictly need?
The answer was that he shouldn't be. So they both resigned from their jobs. They engineered their escape from the rat race.
And because people constantly asked him to explain the mechanics of how he achieved this, he codified his entire methodology into an acronym, the ROUTE investment model.
Let's examine this model systematically as it breaks down the exact mechanics of his strategy.
Let's start at the beginning. The R stands for root, which translates to your profile.
Okay, your profile.
The foundational error he sees most amateur investors make is deploying capital without having clearly defined their own personal identity and end goals. He illustrates this with two highly contrasting examples.
Let's hear them.
On one side, imagine a 55-year-old woman who wants to purchase a property in Spain. Her goal is lifestyle-driven. She wants to live there during the winter months and perhaps rent it out during the summer for some supplementary income.
Makes sense.
On the other side, imagine a highly aggressive 30-year-old investor looking to deploy corporate capital into an emerging market like Lombok, Indonesia, purely to maximize yield and aggressively scale a portfolio.
So if those two individuals try to use the exact same investment map, one of them is going to end up in a disastrous situation.
Right. Your personal route dictates your risk tolerance, your financing structure, and your geographic focus. Once you have defined your specific profile, you advance to the O,
which stands for Untersuch, or research. And this phase is where he issues a severe warning against the modern danger of blind buying, particularly the kind fueled by aesthetic Instagram posts.
Oh, blind buying is so dangerous right now.
He shares a cautionary tale that perfectly illustrates the danger of skipping the research phase. He talks about a woman who bought a beautiful apartment in Spain. She toured it, the view was incredible, and the real estate agent assured her it was an absolute goldmine for Airbnb rentals.
Sounds perfect on the surface.
Right. She gets caught up in the excitement, signs the closing documents, gets the keys, and only then discovers a fatal flaw. The local homeowners association, what they call the VVE in the Netherlands, the organization that governs the building's rules, has an ironclad legal ban on short-term rentals.
Oh, no.
She is legally prohibited from executing her entire business plan.
He uses a fantastic metaphor to describe this specific type of failure. He says it is the equivalent of opening a beautiful beach tent on an industrial estate.
A beach tent on an industrial estate. I love that.
It absolutely does not matter how high quality the tent is or how good your service is. The fundamental regulatory environment of the industrial estate prohibits your business model from functioning.
Which connects directly back to our earlier analysis of macroeconomic regulation and financial fences.
Exactly. Governments globally, from major hubs in Spain to the Netherlands to Marrakech, are aggressively cracking down on short-term rentals in an attempt to protect local housing inventory and appease voters. The regulatory friction is constantly increasing.
So if your Untersuch, your deep research phase, does not meticulously account for local zoning laws, HOA restrictions, and tax implications, your investment value can effectively go to zero overnight.
Precisely. Which brings us to the U, Eintrichten, or calculate. This is the absolute bedrock of financial literacy. It is the fundamental ability to distinguish between activa and passiva, assets versus liabilities.
Things that actively put money into your bank account while you sleep versus things that silently bleed money out of your bank account while you sleep.
And this is the point where we must unpack the concept of debt, specifically the difference between good debt and bad debt.
This is always a tough one for people.
This concept is often the hardest hurdle for people to clear because it runs completely counter to the financial programming most of the middle class receives. The traditional middle class narrative teaches that all debt is inherently dangerous and must be eliminated.
Yeah, the goal you were taught is to pay off your mortgage, pay cash for your car, and owe nothing to anyone.
But when you look at how the ultra-wealthy operate, they don't view debt as a sin to be cleansed. They view debt as a mechanical lever to move heavy objects.
Break that down for me. What's the difference?
Let's look at the mechanics of bad debt first. If you go to a bank and take out a loan at a 5% interest rate to purchase a luxury liability, let's say a high-end boat, you have acquired bad debt.
Because the boat immediately begins depreciating in value the moment it touches the water.
Exactly. It requires constant maintenance, docking fees, and insurance. The boat produces no income. Therefore, the only way to service that 5% debt and pay for the maintenance is by trading your personal time and labor at your 9-to-5 job. The debt owns you.
Okay, and good debt.
Now, look at good debt. You take out that exact same loan at 5% interest, but you use it to purchase an income-producing asset, like a rental property. If that property generates a 10% annual return through rental income, the asset itself pays the 5% interest to the bank, covers its own maintenance, and still generates a 5% profit margin for you.
So your physical labor is entirely removed from the equation. The debt is working for you.
That mechanical shift in understanding debt is the ultimate dividing line between financial slavery and financial freedom. Are you endlessly working to pay off your debt, or have you engineered your debt to work and pay you?
It's a complete paradigm shift. Okay, let's move to the next letter. T's for timing. Understanding that markets are not static. They move in massive, predictable cycles.
Timing is where objective data must override emotion. He points out that certain coastal areas in Spain, like the Costa del Sol, have seen property values explode by 190% over a 5-year period.
190%.
It's massive. But the critical question an investor must ask is, have I already missed this specific boat? Is the explosive growth phase over, leaving only incremental gains? Or do the data and the macro trends suggest I should pivot my strategy toward an emerging market, like Marrakech or Lombok, where the aggressive growth curve is just beginning to form?
Mastering timing requires a complete detachment from FOMO, the fear of missing out. You cannot buy into a market just because your friends are talking about it. You have to look at the cold underlying data of supply, demand, and capital flow.
Exactly. And finally, we arrive at the E, executee execution. And during this part of the interview, he drops a mental model for dealing with professionals that I am absolutely going to steal and use for the rest of my life.
Yes, I love this part. He states that you must treat your lawyers, your real estate brokers, and your financial advisors exactly like you treat ChatGPT.
His exact phrasing is blunt but accurate. If you put shit in, you get shit out.
It is so true. We have this natural tendency when we hire an expensive professional like a lawyer to just hand them a vague problem and say, handle this for me, assuming that because they are professionals, they inherently know what our optimal outcome is.
But they don't. They only know the law. They don't know your specific profile.
You have to prompt them with extreme surgical precision. You can't just say, help me buy a house. You have to say, I intend to purchase this specific property, placing it under this exact corporate structure with the explicit goal of running it as a short-term rental while simultaneously minimizing my tax burden within the Box 2 framework. What are the specific legal roadblocks to executing this exact plan?
Right. If you fail to provide them with a highly specific prompt, they are incapable of providing you with a highly specific, optimized execution. It is a profound mental model for how to properly delegate responsibility.
As the investor, you must maintain total ownership of the strategic vision. You delegate the tactical execution to the experts, but you only do so within rigidly defined, precise parameters.
Yes.
So the RAUTE system is logically sound. It makes sense on paper, but I want to push back on the practical reality of this for a moment.
Let's hear it.
Our guest had his financial awakening and began heavily acquiring real estate around 2008 and 2012. He was buying in the immediate aftermath of the global financial crisis when property prices were suppressed, and he rode a historically unprecedented decade-long wave of near-zero interest rates.
That is a very valid point to bring up.
Today, the landscape is violently different. Interest rates are high, there's a crippling housing shortage across the Western world, and governments are layering on suffocating regulations. Is he simply suffering from massive survivorship bias? Can a normal person, starting with average capital today, actually replicate this success?
That is the most common and arguably the most valid critique leveled at anyone teaching real estate investment right now, and the answer requires nuance.
Okay.
If we are talking strictly about tactics, can you buy a duplex in Amsterdam today using the exact same leverage ratios he used in 2012 and achieve the same cash flow? The answer is almost certainly no.
Because the regulatory environment and the math have fundamentally changed.
Exactly. However, the mechanics of the ROUTE model, understanding the math of assets versus liabilities, meticulously researching local regulatory friction, analyzing market cycles for timing, those mechanics remain universally applicable.
So if the strategy works, you just have to apply it somewhere else.
Right. It simply means the location of the execution must change. Because the friction in the Netherlands or the UK is currently too high, the math dictates that the modern investor must look outward. The execution might shift to purchasing a villa in Lombok or an apartment in the Emirates, where the growth curve and the regulatory environment are more favorable.
And executing that kind of cross-border investment requires stepping far outside of the traditional middle-class comfort zone. Most people are terrified to buy a house in their own zip code, let alone on another continent.
This takes a lot of nerve.
And because he is vocal about this strategy online, he mentions that he receives a significant amount of hate in the comments on his Facebook ads. People regularly call him a slumlord, a scammer, or accuse him of hoarding housing.
Which is pretty common for anyone visible in real estate.
But he analyzes this vitriol not as a personal attack, but as a symptom of widespread financial illiteracy and deep-seated bitterness. He sees it as people who are trapped inside their own financial fences lashing out at someone who figured out how to pick the lock on the gate.
It basically functions as a psychological defense mechanism for those caught in the rat race. If you are grinding away at a 9-to-5 job you dislike, and someone else's visible success proves that an escape route actually exists, it forces a very uncomfortable internal confrontation.
It forces you to confront your own complacency and your own fear of taking calculated risks.
Exactly. Psychologically, it is significantly easier to try and tear down the person who escaped than it is to undertake the grueling, terrifying work of building your own route out of the system.
But here is the most crucial realization of this entire deep dive, I think. Acquiring a massive portfolio of real estate, dealing with contractors across time zones, managing lawyers in Dubai or builders in Indonesia.
No.
None of that is actually the end goal.
No, not at all.
The steel, the bricks, the rental income deposited into the bank, all of it is just a vehicle. But a vehicle to where? What is the actual destination? This brings us to how he redefines the concept of true wealth.
Because if his ultimate goal was simply the endless accumulation of capital, he would still be aggressively grinding. He would be leveraging himself to the limit, trying to acquire 500 or 1,000 doors.
Right.
But his definition of wealth is highly specific and surprisingly human.
He defines true wealth very simply. It is the absolute freedom of choice. The choice to do exactly what you want, exactly when you want to do it, while maintaining good health. As he puts it, real estate is the means, living is the goal.
And he shares a fascinating reflection on his own internal desires versus his external reality. Drawing on his background as a Marine who learned to survive in the absolute harshest conditions, he notes that his personal baseline for happiness requires very little capital.
Oh, yeah. He claims he would be perfectly content living in a simple hammock on a beach in Lombok, surfing every morning, and surviving on 10 euros a day.
Which sounds exactly like the ignorance is bliss model of the family he met in the Sahara, just existing in the physical moment.
Exactly. He possesses the mental capacity for that level of detachment. But he pragmatically acknowledges that he does not live in a vacuum. He has deep responsibilities. He has a wife. He has 2 young children who require education, healthcare, and stability.
He exists within a complex Western society where active participation demands capital. He cannot force his family to live on 10 euros a day in a hammock just because he is capable of doing so.
So the goal of the real estate empire isn't to enable him to be a beach bum. The singular goal, the driving force behind all of this complex international strategy, is a hard deadline he has set for the year 2028.
2028.
Yeah. In 2028, his children will be around 11 and 12 years old. His stated plan is to pull them out of the traditional schooling system for an entire year and take his family on a continuous year-long trip around the globe.
And that entire year of unhindered family time will be fully funded and remotely managed by the cash-flowing portfolio they have spent the last decade building.
It's a beautiful goal.
It really is. And in discussing this specific goal of buying back his time to spend with his children, he touches on a deeply profound sociological shift. He reflects on the historical loss of the family ecosystem.
This specific observation really stuck with me. He points out that for the vast majority of human history, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the default human condition was the multi-generational household.
Right, everyone living together.
You lived in close proximity to or in the same home as your parents, your grandparents, your aunts, and your siblings. The heavy burdens of daily survival were distributed across a wide network. One person tended the fields, another prepared the meals, another watched the collective children, and the elderly provided wisdom and lighter labor.
It was a system built on profound necessary interdependence. The cost of living was amortized across the entire family structure.
But in the post-industrial revolution era, and acutely in the modern West, we have completely dismantled that ecosystem in favor of hyper-individualism.
We really have. The societal expectation now is that at 18 years old, you must leave the communal structure. You are expected to secure your own isolated apartment, purchase your own separate groceries, cook your own individual meals, pay your own redundant utility bills.
And eventually, pay exorbitant market rates for a stranger to watch your children while you go to work to pay for the isolated apartment.
Exactly. We have structurally forced every single individual to bear the absolute maximum financial and emotional cost of living alone.
That is a phenomenal synthesis of the current state of affairs. When you view it through that historical lens, the modern obsession with total financial independence, whether it's the FIRE movement, aggressive real estate investing, or the rise of digital nomadism, is actually a symptom of this lost community interdependence.
That's spot on. Because we no longer inherit our freedom and our leisure time through the shared distributed labor of a multi-generational family unit, we are now forced to individually purchase our freedom back on the open market at a massive premium.
That is a staggering way to look at it.
Right.
Are digital nomads and remote real estate investors essentially just trying to recreate pre-industrial village life, but they are forced to do it on a global, highly digitized scale?
In many structural ways, yes. They are utilizing the most complex, advanced mechanisms of global capitalism leverage, international tax structuring, remote property management,
Right.
to purchase the exact things that used to be the default human condition. Time autonomy, daily proximity to their children, and freedom from an imposed labor schedule.
I love conceptualizing financial independence as the process of building your own personal gravity. When you possess zero assets and live paycheck to paycheck, you have zero mass. Therefore, you are constantly being pulled into someone else's orbit.
That's drifting.
You are pulled into the orbit of a demanding boss. You are pulled into the orbit of a rigid 9-to-5 schedule. You are pulled into the orbit of whatever tax changes your government dictates. You are in free fall.
Right.
But as you slowly build assets, whether that is a portfolio of rental properties, a scalable business, or simply an incredibly robust emergency fund, you begin to generate your own mass. And eventually, if you build enough mass, you generate your own gravitational pull. You are no longer pulled by external forces. You set your own orbit. You choose your environment.
And a crucial component of setting your own orbit is the ability to consciously choose your environment and then accept the realities of that environment completely. There is a beautiful, subtle moment in the interview where he illustrates this through the sounds of different cultures.
Yes, the comparison between the church bells and the mosque. He mentions that in Lombok, Indonesia, where he spends a lot of time, the call to prayer from the local mosque broadcasts over loudspeakers multiple times a day, starting very early in the morning.
And he notes that many Western expats or tourists constantly complain about the noise.
But he points out that back in Alkmaar, in the Netherlands where he lived, his house was located near a large traditional church. And that church bell would strike the hour, every single hour, all night long. At 1 a.m. it rings once. At 1:30 a.m. it rings once. At 2 a.m. it rings twice.
It serves as a stunning metaphor for human perspective and our tendency to frame our own familiar annoyances as normal while framing foreign annoyances as intolerable.
What one person angrily labels as a foreign intrusion into their peace, another person peacefully accepts as simply the local soundtrack of the environment they chose.
Practically speaking, the decibel level of the mosque in Lombok is no different than the decibel level of the church bell in Alkmaar. The friction doesn't exist in the sound. The friction exists entirely in the mindset you choose to adopt toward the sound.
Which brings this entire exploration full circle. As we zoom out and look at the territory we've covered in this deep dive, it is a remarkable trajectory.
It really is.
We started high up in the macroeconomic clouds, analyzing the very real fears of financial fences, the mechanics of exit taxes, and that claustrophobic feeling of losing control to massive shifting global systems.
From that high-level macro view, we drop straight into the freezing mud of special forces training. We learned that when all external control vanishes, when the environment is maximally hostile, the only lifeline you have left is internal emotional control, the deliberate, practiced separation of how you feel from how you execute.
We took that mental framework into the Sahara Desert, realizing that the neat, Binary geopolitical narratives we are fed from the top down almost always crumble when confronted with the messy human reality on the ground. And we saw the profound, undeniable peace that comes from a state of selective ignorance.
We then translated those philosophical insights into a highly tactical escape plan. We broke down the ROUTE to financial independence, exploring the counterintuitive mechanics of leveraging good debt and the necessity of treating professional advisors as algorithms that require precise prompting.
And ultimately, we arrived at a redefinition of true wealth. Not a scoreboard of accumulated capital, but the raw autonomy to buy back the time, the freedom, and the family proximity that our modern, hyper-individualized society has stripped away from us.
It is a cohesive, robust operating philosophy built from a truly unique synthesis of extreme military conditioning and high-level macroeconomic maneuvering.
And the most empowering aspect of this entire framework is that you do not need to be a Special Forces Marine who survived a freezing mountain, and you do not need to be a multi-millionaire real estate mogul buying villas in Indonesia to start applying it.
You really don't.
The application of this mindset begins tomorrow morning. When the inevitable chaos of life strikes, when you spill your coffee on your laptop, when you receive an infuriating email from your boss, or when your blender explodes and coats your entire kitchen in sticky oatmeal, you possess the power in that exact microsecond to pause.
You can observe the emotional flinch, acknowledge the absolute frustration of the moment, and then consciously choose a constructive execution.
But as we close out our analysis today, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to turn over in your mind.
Let's hear it.
We have spent this time deconstructing how to build a massive financial fortress in order to escape the rat race. But if the ultimate defined goal of all this intense wealth building, all this complex leveraging of international debt and real estate, is simply to regain the freedom of a pre-industrial village lifestyle, having the time to sit quietly with your family, enjoy simple daily pleasures, and disconnect from the global noise.
Are we simply using the most complex, high-stress, high-friction tools of late-stage capitalism to buy our way back to the starting line of human history?
That is a heavy question to sit with.
And if that is true, is there a shortcut you could take today that doesn't require the exhaustion of building a global real estate empire? Is it possible to locate a piece of that Sahara piece right now in your current life simply by choosing to turn off the noise and focus on the family ecosystem you already have?
I love ending on that note. Perhaps the blueprint for a good life doesn't actually have to be an international architectural marvel. Maybe we just need to learn how to navigate our own muddy waters with a little more grace and a lot more intention. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives you are handed. Watch out for those financial fences, and we will catch you on the next one.